On Father's Day, my son handed me a wrinkled $1.50 lottery ticket and presented his father-in-law with a $22,000 luxury trip to Dubai. In front of nearly 30 guests, I was embarrassed. 1 week later, fortune turned in my favor. When the facts surfaced, my phone filled with 67 missed calls in rapid succession. I chose not to return them. Instead, I arranged a video call that would teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. Hello to everyone watching. Before we move on, leave a comment if you've ever received a gift that made you feel insignificant. If you're ready to hear how this unfolded, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens during that call. This story contains creative elements designed to add clarity and meaning. Let's continue. My name is James Sullivan. I'm 55 years old. 2 months ago, on Father's Day, at Edward Thornton's estate, surrounded by about 30 people, my son gave his father-in-law a $22,000 European vacation. I received a crumpled lottery ticket worth $1.50. I teach philosophy at UNC. I've spent most of my adult life helping 19-year-olds understand Aristotle and Kant, which can feel like explaining color to someone who's never seen it. Still, that's the work. I earn $68,000 a year, which in Chapel Hill means you live comfortably, but you don't stand out. And in Edward Thornton's home, if you don't stand out, you may as well not exist. Dinner was set for 6 p.m. on Sunday. Edward's house is what realtors call distinguished, 8,000 square feet of brick and columns on 3 acres. It's the kind of place that makes you glance at your shoes before stepping inside. The dining room comfortably seats 20, but he arranged space for 32, resulting in crowded elbows and overlapping conversations, the forced cheer of people trying to appear happy. I sat near the middle, squeezed between one of Ashley's cousins and a man whose name I had already forgotten. Rachel, my daughter, sat at the far end with the younger crowd, Ashley's junior league friends and their husbands in pastel shirts and expensive watches. She caught my eye once and gave me a small smile that said, "I see you." It was the only moment that felt genuine. Edward presided at the head of the table, 60 years old, silver-haired, with the permanent tan of someone who golfs several times a week. He built his fortune in manufacturing, industrial parts, I think. He explained it to me more than once, and I forgot each time. He retired 5 years ago to focus on what matters, which mostly seemed to involve reminding everyone nearby of his wealth. Midway through dinner, Edward raised his voice. "James, how's the philosophy department? Still teaching kids to question everything?" "Something like that," I replied. "Must be fulfilling," he said, in a tone suggesting the opposite. "All those young minds. I've always believed real education happens in the real world, building things, creating jobs, but not everyone's suited for that." A few people laughed, not cruelly, just politely, the kind of laughter that follows a wealthy man's joke. I said nothing. Over the years, I've learned silence can be the most respectful response. Ashley, Chad's wife, sat near Edward, playing the gracious host. She was polished in the way money polishes people. Perfect hair, flawless skin, immaculate teeth. She refilled Edward's glass and smiled at me like someone trying to remember where we'd met before. Chad sat to Edward's right, my son, 32, wearing a tailored blazer that likely cost more than my monthly mortgage. He looked relaxed, confident, as though he belonged there in a way I never bid. When dessert arrived, a lemon tart topped with gold leaf, Edward tapped his glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming. Family is everything." He looked at Chad, "and I'm grateful for such a thoughtful son-in-law." Chad stood, smiling. "Actually, Ashley and I wanted to do something special today." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Edward. Edward opened it slowly. His eyes widened. "Chad, this is incredible. 3 weeks in Europe. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, business-class flights, 5-star hotels, all covered. You've earned it." The room filled with applause. Edward hugged Chad, beaming. Guests murmured their approval. Edward looked across the table at me. "This is what I mean, James. Building something. Taking care of family."
I nodded. There wasn't much else to do. Then Chad turned to me. "And Dad," he said, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a crumpled slip of paper and slid it across the table. "A Powerball ticket, $1.50. I figured you could use a little luck," he said, smiling. The room erupted in laughter, real laughter. Someone patted my back. Edward chuckled. Ashley covered her mouth, though her eyes showed amusement. I picked up the ticket. Torn edges, smudged ink. It looked like an afterthought. $22,000 compared to $1.50. 30 witnesses. I looked at Rachel. She wasn't laughing. She met my eyes with a mix of anger and sadness. I folded the ticket and placed it in my pocket. "Thank you," I said quietly. Conversation moved on. Travel plans, Paris restaurants. I sat there feeling invisible. Later, I excused myself to the bathroom. Standing at the sink, I saw a tired man with gray hair, wearing a decade-old jacket, holding a lottery ticket that felt more like a joke than a gift. I needed a moment to remember who I was. 2 years earlier, a drunk driver ran a red light and nearly took Rachel from me. I got the call late at night while grading essays. The drive to the hospital is a blur. Machines, alarms. A nurse explained her injuries, spinal trauma, fractures, internal bleeding. Rachel spent 2 weeks in the ICU. I sat by her side every night, talking about anything, campus gossip, weather, philosophy, because the doctors said she might hear me. Claire had been gone for 20 years by then. Cancer, quick and unforgiving. There was no one else to share the burden, just me and the machines. Rachel survived. Surgeries followed, physical therapy, chronic pain. She eventually returned to nursing and to her life. Then came the bills. Insurance covered much of it, but $188,000 remained. I went to banks. They said no. That's when Chad offered help, a family loan. I was exhausted. I signed without reading closely. Months later, I learned the interest rate was 38% APR. The collateral was my house. I called Chad. He reminded me the terms were legal. At least that's what he claimed. I paid every month, $8,500. The balance barely moved. Driving home after Father's Day, I thought about the ticket in my pocket and everything I'd risked. That night, at home, I noticed a folder in my study, client files from Chad's company. Inside were loan contracts, neighbors, local business owners, all with illegal interest rates. I photographed everything. That week, I continued teaching as usual, but my thoughts stayed with those documents. On Saturday, Rachel called and asked if I'd checked the ticket. I finally did. Every number matched. The jackpot was $100 million. I didn't call anyone back. I sat there, thinking. Then I called my sister, Susan. She'd seen Chad's messages months earlier, messages about foreclosing on my house, about using my debt as leverage. We met with a lawyer. The loans were illegal, void. Chad could face charges. I told Rachel everything. She listened carefully and asked one thing, that I not become like them. 2 weeks after Father's Day, Edward hosted a farewell party for his trip. About 30 guests, wine, laughter, celebration. Edward stood proudly, showing off his itinerary, and that's where the next chapter began.
3 weeks of luxury hotels and Michelin-star dining, all funded by my son. Edward called out when he noticed me nearby. "Come take a look at this." Chad found us a restaurant in Paris that had a 2-year waiting list. 2 years! Somehow, he managed to secure a reservation anyway. I walked over, nodded politely at the screen showing white tablecloths, chandeliers, and polished silverware. "Impressive," I said. "That's what family does," Edward replied, patting Chad on the shoulder. "We look after our own." Ashley moved through the crowd in a white sundress, acting as hostess. She refreshed drinks, laughed easily, touched arms in passing. When she came by me, she smiled politely, distant, the same expression reserved for someone you barely know at a formal event. Someone asked about my summer plans. Mostly reading, I said. A bit of work around the house. Chad laughed from across the patio. Dad's not much of a traveler, more of a books and quiet type. A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because silence needed filling. I'd heard versions of that line my entire adult life. The absent-minded professor, the man lost in his thoughts, the one who preferred Kant to crowds. It once bothered me. Now it barely registered. About an hour later, Chad caught me near the grill. Ashley was inside getting wine. Edward was distracted, showing photos on his phone. "Dad," Chad said quietly, "just a reminder, next payment's due while we're gone. $8,500. You'll have it, right?" I looked at him closely. The expensive watch, the tailored shirt, the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own entitlement. "I'll take care of it," I said. "Good. You know what happens if you don't." "I know." He smiled, the same satisfied smile he'd worn when he tossed that lottery ticket onto the table, and walked back to the party, back to his carefully curated image of success. I stayed by the grill, thinking about the LLC I'd formed 3 days earlier, about the lottery claim filed under its name, about the complaint already sitting in Richard Patterson's office, prepared for the Attorney General, about how many ways Chad believed he controlled me, and how mistaken he was. As the sun set, the party wound down. Guests hugged Edward, wished him safe travels. Someone toasted family and adventure. Glasses were raised. I lifted mine as well. Because in 3 weeks, while Chad and Edward were in Barcelona, and Ashley believed everything was still under control, I would make a phone call that would change everything. Driving home, I thought about Marcus Aurelius. I'd taught his words for years. The best revenge is to be unlike the one who wronged you. I believed that for most of my life. Rise above, don't descend. But the Stoics never wrote about sons who weaponized family, who turned love into leverage, who smiled while planning their father's financial collapse. Sometimes it isn't revenge. Sometimes it's simply the truth. Chad and Edward left for Europe early Tuesday morning. I didn't see them off. Ashley drove them to the airport before sunrise. At 7 a.m., I received a text. "Payment due while we're gone. Don't be late." 3 weeks earlier, that message would have tightened my chest. This time, I deleted it. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in Richard Patterson's office. Everything was ready. The LLC paperwork, the lottery claim, the complaint documenting Chad's lending practices across 8 families. "Once this is filed, the investigation becomes public," Richard said. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. Not like 2 years ago in Chad's office. Not like that day in the hospital cafeteria. I signed everything. "I'll file the claim today. The AG complaint goes out Monday." Good. 3 days later, Rachel came by. She held up her phone. "You're certain?" "I am." We stood on the porch of 447 Oakwood Drive, the house my parents bought 40 years ago, the house Chad planned to take. Evening light hit the brick just right. Rachel snapped the photo. I posted it with a simple caption, "Some legacies are worth protecting." Within an hour, comments appeared. Compliments, familiar names. I didn't reply. At 6 o'clock, I turned on the local news. A Powerball ticket worth $100 million had been sold in Chapel Hill. My phone rang before the anchor finished. Ashley. "Did you hear?" she asked. "About what?" "The lottery. Someone here won." "That's something," I said. A pause. "James, you still have that ticket Chad gave you, right?" "Yes." "Have you checked it?" "No." "Please check it." "I'm eating dinner." "James, it's $100 million. "I'll look later." I hung up, silenced my phone, and finished my meal. By Tuesday morning, I had 23 missed calls. By Thursday, 67. I let them accumulate. That Tuesday, I taught Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. I'd taught it for 30 decades. That day, it felt different. Today, I told my students, we're discussing justice, not abstract justice, but the kind that begins when you stop accepting injustice as normal. They listened. By Thursday, the calls kept coming. I played the voicemails while making breakfast. Ashley's messages grew frantic. Chad's shifted from concern to strategy. One voicemail stopped me cold. "Dad, Ashley's freaking out." He corrected himself too late. That slip said everything. Thursday evening, I texted the family group chat. Sunday, 8 p.m., video call. Everyone needs to be there. They all agreed. Sunday arrived quietly. At 7:45, I laid everything out. Contracts, screenshots, the statute, the bank statement. I tested screen sharing 3 times. At 7:55, Rachel called. "Remember, don't become like them." I won't. At 8 o'clock, I clicked Start Meeting. Chad and Edward appeared together from a hotel room in Rome. Ashley joined from the living room. They expected good news. "Did you check the ticket?" Chad asked. I did. All 6 numbers matched. Chaos followed. Then silence. "Before we talk about money," I said, "there's something else." I shared my screen. The loan agreement appeared. North Carolina caps private lending at 30% interest. This loan was 38%. That makes it illegal. Chad went pale. Ashley finally understood. And then, piece by piece, the truth unfolded. The contracts, the families, the messages, the plan. No raised voice, no theatrics, just facts. By the end, Ashley left the call. Edward booked a flight home. Chad sat alone. "You destroyed my life," he said. "No, you did." I ended the call. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe. Rachel texted moments later, "I'm proud of you." I looked around the study my father built, the house that stood, the truth that finally did. And that was enough.
I believed I had said everything that needed to be said during that video call. At the time, I meant it. I thought it was finished. But Ashley kept calling. 12 missed calls over 3 days. I let every one go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to respond. I wasn't sure I ever would be. Her first message came during the 3rd week, on a Tuesday. She sounded uncertain, hesitant. She said she didn't know who else to speak to about what needed to happen next. Her voice was small and unsteady, nothing like the composed woman who had stood beside Chad at Edward's estate, smiling while he handed me a lottery ticket worth $1.50. That evening, I played the message for Rachel while we ate dinner at her apartment. She listened carefully. "She's a victim too, Dad," Rachel said quietly, "even if she treated us badly." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not ready." Rachel nodded. She didn't push. She said I didn't know Ashley anything, but added that when I was ready, Ashley might need someone who understood what she was going through. I thought about that. Ashley had looked down on me for 2 years. She had laughed at that Father's Day dinner. She was now facing what it meant to be married to someone who viewed people as transactions. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe Ashley had been trapped longer than I had realized. Still, forgiveness or even understanding would take time. By the 3rd week, the civil lawsuits began. The Johnsons filed first, then Aisha Williams, then Dean Anderson's daughter, the one forced to use her engagement ring as collateral. In total, 23 families filed individual suits, each seeking damages and accountability. Richard called again. The Attorney General's office wanted to speak with me. They needed my testimony, the loan, the timeline, the interest rate, the pressure Chad applied. When Richard asked if I was ready,
I looked around my study, my father's clock, my father's desk, the house he had built himself, the house I nearly lost because I trusted the wrong person. "I'm ready," I said. The fourth week arrived quickly. Chad hired 3 attorneys, a criminal defense lawyer from Raleigh, a civil litigator from Charlotte, and a reputation consultant. It wouldn't be enough. Edward Thornton released a public statement. I read it on a library computer between classes. He expressed shock and distance, denied any knowledge, and emphasized cooperation with investigators. It was carefully worded, designed to protect his legacy. The inheritance Chad had pursued so aggressively was now out of reach. Ashley called again that week. I still didn't answer, but I listened. She told me she had filed for divorce. Finalization would take 6 months. She said she had agreed to testify against Chad at the request of the AG's office. There was a pause. She apologized for her silence at those dinners, for the comments, for the lottery ticket incident. She said she should have spoken up. I sat in my study afterward, looking at a photograph of my parents standing in front of this house on the day it was finished. They looked proud. They had built something meant to last. Chad had tried to take it by exploiting my fear and my love for Rachel. He turned a crisis into profit. But the house still stood, and so did I. On Friday of the 4th week, I made 2 calls. The first was to Richard. I told him to schedule my testimony. The second was to Ashley. She answered immediately. I told her I was sorry for the delay. I said we would talk, but not yet. I needed more time. She understood. I ended the call and looked around the study. Chad had lawyers and a collapsing business. His reputation was gone. Edward had disowned him. Ashley had left. 23 families were suing him. The state was preparing charges. And I was sitting in my father's chair, in my father's house, surrounded by books and memories, having lived my life on $68,000 a year with the belief that people mattered more than profit. I told the truth. That was all. And it was enough. 6 weeks after the video call, a handwritten letter arrived from Ashley. I stared at it before opening it. She admitted she had believed the version of me Chad presented. She acknowledged her cruelty and silence. She said ignorance wasn't innocence. She wrote about leaving Chad, living alone for the first time, and choosing honesty over comfort. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. I read the letter twice. Then I showed it to Rachel. "She's trying," Rachel said. "You taught me that virtue comes from practice. Maybe this is her starting." Rachel was right. People don't change instantly. They change through action. Weeks later, Ashley and I met for coffee. She looked different, less polished, more grounded. She told me she had been helping Richard with paperwork for some of Chad's victims, volunteering her time. She wasn't asking to erase the past. She was choosing differently. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I told her that. She accepted it. Driving home, I thought about justice and mercy, accountability and compassion. Ashley wasn't innocent, but she was changing. That mattered. A year later, I stood before my philosophy seminar and asked the same question I always ask. What does it mean to live well? I still live in the same house. I still teach. The money remains mostly untouched. Rachel thrives. The scholarship fund supports first-generation students. Chad took a plea deal. He lost everything but avoided prison. People asked if the money changed my life. Yes and no. It gave me options, but it didn't give me worth. That came from choosing truth over silence. I keep the lottery ticket framed on my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The universe doesn't owe us fairness, but we owe ourselves honesty. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this. Worth isn't assigned by others, it's claimed. 2 years ago, I stood in a mansion holding a crumpled ticket and felt invisible. Today,
I stand in my Father's house, surrounded by people who chose me and whom I chose back. That's worth more than money. And if you take nothing else from this, remember this: you don't need a lottery ticket to reclaim your value. You just need to tell the truth, even when it costs you. That choice is the real jackpot.